Between the tragic years 1914 and 1918, World War I cost a staggering $200 billion. By the devastating end of World War II, global military expenditures skyrocketed to over $4 trillion. Wars are not just fought by brave soldiers. They are financed by ruthless corporate titans everywhere. To uncover the hidden financial engines behind global conflicts, please subscribe to Market Legends today. Welcome to the untold history of global wealth. Subscribe to Market Legends for historical insights. War remains the ultimate catalyst for human destruction and the absolute peak of corporate wealth. Before modern nations possessed massive power, multinational corporations successfully did all the heavy lifting. The British East India Company functioned as a heavily armed, utterly ruthless corporate empire. At its absolute peak, the trading company commanded 260,000 armed soldiers. That private military force was exactly twice the size of the official British military. The company generated massive revenues, easily surpassing trillions of dollars in today's currency. They actively funded wars to strictly enforce corporate trade monopolies across the Indian subcontinent. Lucrative profit margins were defended with heavy artillery, sharp bayonets, and massive naval blockades. Generous dividends were paid to London shareholders through campaigns of systemic military colonial conquest. As the centuries turned, war privatization evolved rapidly from private armies to corporate suppliers. The Industrial Revolution brought efficient mass production directly to the extremely violent European battlefield. The Krupp family of Germany quickly became the undisputed masters of modern mechanized warfare. For over 400 years, they successfully manufactured the heavy tools of human destruction. Krupp steel eventually became the gold standard benchmark for military artillery across the globe. They perfected modern cannons that dramatically increased firing rates and overall battlefield lethality. Krupp enthusiastically sold weapons to anyone who could easily afford their incredibly premium prices. During various conflicts, Krupp artillery frequently fired at other Krupp artillery across the trenches. The political ideology of the buyer was completely irrelevant to the German weapons manufacturer. By the year 1914, European Krupp factories were running at their absolute maximum capacity. When World War I erupted, the required financial capital to fight was totally unprecedented. Warring nations burned through their national treasuries at a rate never witnessed in history. Britain and France could not outpace the massive German industrial war machine alone. They desperately needed money from a secure source untouched by the devastating European destruction. They turned their attention toward the undisputed financial capital of the booming New World. They turned directly to the powerful House of Morgan located in New York City. J.P. Morgan, Jr. recognized the European conflict as a massive and incredibly historic opportunity. Wall Street was initially highly hesitant due to official United States government diplomatic neutrality. But political neutrality is remarkably fragile when billions in sovereign debt are generously offered. The House of Morgan quickly became the sole purchasing agent for the desperate Allied powers. They diligently sourced the massive quantities of heavy munitions needed for the entire global war. Morgan organized thousands of American banks to float massive foreign loans to Europe safely. They successfully raised $500 million in a single, unprecedented, highly historic bond issue. By the tragic end, the bank orchestrated $3 billion in total wartime financing. That amount is equivalent to $90 billion funneled directly into massive combat operations. The prominent bank earned commissions on every single bullet and heavy artillery shell purchased. They were the financial lifeblood keeping the exhausted Allied armies functioning on the front. Without Morgan credit lines, the British and French war machines would immediately halt completely. This immense capital influx transformed America into the world's primary and undisputed financial creditor. It linked the American economy inextricably to an eventual Allied military victory in Europe. If Britain defaulted on debts, Wall Street would have faced an apocalyptic financial collapse. This harsh economic reality deeply influenced America's eventual direct entry into the bloody conflict. American industrial giants quickly transitioned their domestic factories to meet insatiable European military demand. DuPont experienced an explosive, unprecedented surge in revenue from chemical and explosive weapons manufacturing. Before the global war, DuPont held a highly comfortable, completely peaceful domestic market share. They rapidly expanded their production to supply smokeless powder and deadly high-yield military explosives. DuPont supplied an astonishing 40% of all high explosives used by Allied forces. Gross corporate revenues skyrocketed to over $300 million by the year 1918. This massive wartime windfall allowed DuPont to transform into a permanent global chemical behemoth. They poured their military profits into developing commercial plastics and highly lucrative synthetic materials. War was the ultimate capital foundation of their incredibly massive and incredibly modern empire. The conclusion of the Great War was supposed to bring permanent peace to humanity. Instead, it was a short intermission to perfectly refine the sophisticated technologies of death. In the following decades, the massive multinational corporation began to mature rapidly and aggressively. Corporations boldly prioritized global market share over strict traditional and binding national allegiances. This global corporate expansion created severe moral paradoxes when the world fractured in 1939. Companies often found highly profitable domestic operations trapped deep inside heavily fortified hostile territory. Ford Motor Company established a massive manufacturing presence in Germany before the war. The enormous Ford Werke plant in Cologne was a true marvel of modern assembly efficiency. The Third Reich needed reliable, mass-produced transport vehicles for their armies. The factory seamlessly transitioned to manufacturing heavy military trucks for the expanding German army. These specific vehicles were absolutely critical to the early, highly successful German Blitzkrieg campaigns. General Motors found themselves in a nearly identical, highly complicated predicament with subsidiary Opel. Opel was the single largest automotive manufacturer in Germany at the time of conflict. Under strict regime direction, Opel factories became vital cogs in the massive military machine. They efficiently produced the primary logistical backbone of the entire sprawling German armed forces. General Motors executives in Detroit were fully aware of this massive industrial production shift. They continued receiving detailed financial reports and lucrative dividends well into the late 1930s. Profit motives blinded corporate leadership completely to the unfolding, catastrophic geopolitical tragedy in Europe. Companies only lost operational control when America officially and decisively entered the global war. The subsidiaries were formally nationalized to ensure uninterrupted, highly efficient, continuous military vehicle production. That early wartime industrial collaboration remains a controversial and deeply uncomfortable chapter in history. Technology companies also found themselves deeply entangled in the complex web of wartime commerce. Information processing was rapidly becoming as vital to modern warfare as high-explosive artillery. IBM was the undisputed global pioneer of mechanical punch card data management and tabulation. Their advanced machines processed massive amounts of demographic data with totally unprecedented, chilling speed. In the 1930s, IBM successfully operated a highly profitable German subsidiary widely known as Die Homag. The German government quickly became their single largest and most incredibly lucrative corporate client. The regime utilized IBM technology to execute massive national censuses with terrifying mechanical efficiency. This data capability allowed the state to rapidly identify and efficiently track targeted populations. The technological infrastructure inadvertently facilitated the organization of government-sponsored persecution and tragedy. IBM in New York maintained a highly profitable, continuous business relationship with their German subsidiary. They leased machines and provided essential ongoing technical maintenance for the complex tabulation systems. The relentless pursuit of global market dominance completely overshadowed the horrific realities of implementation. Corporate neutrality became a highly convenient shield for executing highly lucrative, morally questionable commercial contracts. War predictably creates a binary economic environment of absolute financial winners and absolute financial losers. For the diverse corporations providing necessary infrastructure, the deadly conflicts meant unprecedented financial growth. They obviously did not draft the devastating, world-altering declarations of war by themselves directly. But they financed the declarations and built the advanced data systems involved in combat. Modern global business architecture is deeply, permanently intertwined with a bloody history of conflict. The intricate relationship between private capital and global combat was about to change permanently. The historic conclusion of World War II fundamentally shifted the massive global landscape of international business forever. The victorious nations recognized that industrial supremacy was the absolute key to permanent global geopolitical dominance. The military and industrial complex was no longer a temporary measure. It became a permanent fixture. The United States government began to forge unbreakable, lucrative alliances with private defense technology contractors. The Cold War provided the ultimate economic justification for infinite and perpetual government military spending. Unlike previous conflicts, this new era required constant technological escalation without actual direct physical combat. This dynamic created a remarkably stable and highly lucrative revenue stream for major defense contractors. Lockheed Corporation rapidly emerged as one of the primary corporate beneficiaries of this new era. During the Second World War, Lockheed had successfully produced thousands of heavily armed combat aircraft, but the nuclear age demanded completely different delivery systems and highly advanced aerial surveillance capabilities. The company pivoted toward developing high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft like the famous U-2 spy plane. These engineering marvels required unprecedented levels of federal funding and highly classified massive research budgets. Government contracts became essentially guaranteed, providing absolute financial security for the massive aerospace defense corporation. Lockheed's massive revenue streams were entirely decoupled from the normal fluctuations of the consumer market. Their only customer was the Pentagon, and the Pentagon had a practically unlimited, massive budget. Boeing experienced a nearly identical transformation from a commercial manufacturer into a global defense behemoth. They were tasked with building the strategic bombers that carried the American nuclear deterrent payload. The B-52 Stratofortress became the terrifying physical manifestation of American military and massive economic power. The extreme cost to develop and manufacture these fleets injected billions into the private sector. Defense spending essentially functioned as a massive, continuous economic stimulus program for giant aerospace companies. Entire American cities and regional economies became completely dependent on the awarding of federal contracts. This deep integration of the economy and the military created a powerful self-sustaining political force. Companies like Raytheon began to pioneer the advanced development of guided missile systems and radar. The technology of war was rapidly becoming highly specialized, heavily digitized, and incredibly unspeakably expensive. Raytheon's absolute mastery of microwave technology and electronics made them absolutely indispensable to the government. The extreme complexity of these modern weapon systems ensured that only massive, wealthy corporations competed. This corporate consolidation created a powerful, deeply entrenched oligopoly within the global defense contracting industry. The financial barriers to entry were impossibly high, protecting profit margins for the established giants, War was no longer just about supplying boots, heavy rifles, and gunpowder to front lines. It was about developing aerospace engineering, satellite communications, and highly classified electronic warfare systems. The sheer financial scale of these projects dwarfed the corporate military funding of previous centuries. By the late 20th century, the concept of a totally privately funded war had vanished. Instead, the extreme risk was completely socialized, while the extreme profits remained highly, exclusively privatized. Taxpayers funded the massive research and development, while corporate shareholders quietly reaped the massive rewards. The Vietnam War clearly highlighted the enormous profitability of this deeply entrenched military-industrial financial relationship. Defense contractors gladly supplied helicopters, chemical defoliants, and millions of tons of high-explosive ordnance. The conflict was a geopolitical disaster, but it was an undeniable financial triumph for suppliers. Stock prices for the major military contractors surged as the controversial overseas combat deployment escalated. The profound morality of the conflict was hotly debated outside, but completely ignored in boardrooms. War had seamlessly become a highly optimized business model, totally insulated from unpredictable public sentiment. The defense industry learned to perfectly navigate the complex, incredibly lucrative corridors of Washington power. Former generals and high-ranking defense officials frequently transitioned directly into lucrative corporate board executive positions. This revolving door ensured that the interests of the military and the corporations remained aligned. As the 20th century closed, the grim nature of warfare evolved toward precision surgical strikes. The Gulf War proudly showcased the devastating effectiveness of computer-guided weaponry and advanced stealth technology. Millions of viewers watched live television as smart bombs accurately decimated heavily fortified military targets. For modern defense companies, this televised conflict was the ultimate billion-dollar global military marketing campaign. International global demand for American military technology skyrocketed immediately in the aftermath of the conflict. The defense industry aggressively exported their sophisticated, highly lethal weapon systems to aligned nations worldwide. Selling advanced arms to foreign governments became a highly lucrative secondary revenue stream for corporations. The post-Cold War era brought a brief, highly temporary reduction in overall global military spending, but the horrific events of September 2001 permanently reversed that temporary, downward military spending trend. The subsequent global war on terror initiated 2 decades of continuous, heavily funded military engagement. Global defense budgets expanded exponentially, reaching extreme heights unseen since the Cold War. Private military contractors like Blackwater introduced a completely new dimension to modern corporate war profiteering. For the very first time in centuries, heavily armed private corporate soldiers returned to battlefields. The government outsourced basic logistics, base security, and even complex tactical operations to private entities. This massive privatization effort resulted in billions of dollars flowing into shadowy corporate bank accounts. The modern battlefield is now a deeply complex ecosystem of public and private enterprise. Today, global international military spending regularly exceeds an astonishing $2 trillion every single year. The top 5 global defense contractors alone generate hundreds of billions in massive annual revenue. The machinery of war requires a constant, unending supply of capital to remain operational. The historical progression from the British East India Company to modern defense contractors is clear. The heavy tools of destruction have evolved from simple muskets to autonomous drone systems. But the underlying financial mechanism driving these devastating conflicts has remained remarkably consistent throughout history. Global conflict requires capital, and capital instinctively seeks out the highest possible return on investment. As long as powerful nations disagree, there will always be a deeply profitable market available. The massive corporations that supply this market do not operate out of malice or ideology. They operate entirely out of a fiduciary duty to maximize massive profits for institutional shareholders. War is simply a uniquely inelastic global market with a universally guaranteed, highly funded buyer. The moral implications of manufacturing heavy weapons are completely sterilized by the mechanics of markets. A quiet retirement fund in London or New York might unwittingly profit from overseas conflict. The incredible distance between the boardroom and the battlefield creates a deeply convenient psychological disconnect. Corporate executives manage quarterly earnings reports, not the devastating physical consequences of their lethal products. The true devastating cost of war is paid in human lives, ruined cities, and trauma. But the immense financial rewards are quietly deposited into offshore accounts and corporate treasuries worldwide. History shows that whenever governments lack the direct resources to fight, corporations will intervene. They will generously extend the credit, they will build the heavy bombs and collect. The ongoing privatization of global conflict is not a modern anomaly. It is the standard. The ambitious companies that funded the great wars of history built the foundations of today. Their incredible financial success proves that organized violence is arguably the most profitable industry ever. The modern weapons will inevitably change, but the extremely lucrative business of war will endure. The relentless, highly profitable cycle of global military buildup and subsequent deployment appears absolutely unbreakable. As long as humanity embraces conflict, the corporate war machine will continue to thrive effortlessly. Understanding this financial architecture is completely essential to truly understanding modern global geopolitics and economics. We must recognize the massive economic incentives that actively perpetuate endless, highly destructive military engagements. The detailed balance sheets of modern defense contractors tell a much darker story than history. They reveal the cold, calculated arithmetic that actively underpins the immense tragedy of human warfare. The legacy of these massive corporations is permanently etched into the bloody battlefields of Earth. We have explored the hidden financial engines that have quietly driven global conflicts forever. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the business of warfare. We will continuously uncover the powerful financial forces that quietly shape our modern global reality. Remember that behind every major historical event, there is a complex hidden financial corporate infrastructure. Stay curious, stay highly informed, and always question the economic motives behind the geopolitical headlines. To uncover more untold histories of wealth and power, please subscribe to Market Legends.